I'm very happy to be here today. Thank you for the invitation. I'm Johanna, and for those, I'm not sure if you maybe I missed the introduction round yesterday. I'm currently a postdoctoral researcher at the Chair of Being Alive at ETH, which is the Chair of Landscape Architecture run by Teresa Gali-Isard. And I was previously a doctoral fellow at the Institute for Landscape and Urban Studies at ETH. I just graduated there. And I'm an architect. I've been trained in Germany and in London, and now I'm in Switzerland since 5 years, and kind of shifted more and more towards landscape. And what I'm presenting today is also somewhat connected to my doctoral research. So we've heard already quite a bit. I will speak for not even half an hour, so I think there's some time for questions, and you can also always interrupt me. We've had already quite a bit about Lucius Burckhardt yesterday in his work. He showed us that landscapes are not neutral spaces, rather, and this was also mentioned before, they are shaped by our perception, by what we notice and but also by what we overlook and by ways in which we move through them. In my contribution today, it builds on this, but it also shifts the focus slightly. I want to ask what happens if we read landscapes not as backdrops to human activity, but as milieus, as places shaped by layered processes and by the presence of many different beings. Can we learn to notice the overlapping rhythms of inhabitation and diverse practices of maintenance that shape them? And perhaps most importantly, how can we even train ourselves to perceive such modern human relations? Here, I think experts play a crucial role. People who over many years have developed a sensitivity to certain species and who can help us notice their presence and understand landscapes in relation to other than human inhabitants. I think that in the morning we had kind of already a glimpse into this, how much guided walking in that sense can help somehow sharpen our perception. And that's also kind of what I was working with in my doctoral research. In that work, I followed 3 species along the Upper Rhine that flows between Basel and Frankfurt. It was the Atlantic salmon, the sand martin, and the floodwater mosquito. And through these kind of following these species, I tried to get a different view and make a different reading of this very heavily transformed landscape. And through these questions that I just formulated, this also led to the practice or to this method of multi-species walking, a way of researching and knowing landscapes through modern human relations to challenge the human dimension as an absolute reference point for spatial research. Last year, I wrote about this in Researching Otherwise, which I brought you, and you can have a look there. Very other maybe also related contributions. I can pass it around, but I can also leave it for later. Nitin Bathla was the editor, and he's also going to present tonight. The starting point for multi-species walking was a series of guided walks with experts. I accompanied ecologists, biologists, and birders through floodplains, rivers, fields, and neighborhoods. Together, we explored how humans share spaces with fish, birds, and insects. These experts had built long-term relationships with particular species. They had learned to read subtle signs, a gravel bed where salmon spawn, a plant that signals wet ground, or the flight patterns of certain birds. Walking with them changed how I perceived the places I was studying. What at first seemed like an ordinary meadow or a straightened river revealed itself as a landscape full of rhythms, practices of maintenance, and acts of care. The land became a milieu, a shared living environment shaped through modern human relations. In my doctoral research and in this recent book chapter, I argue that multi-species walking combines aspects from ethnographic walking practices, multi-species studies, and insights from animal geography. But other than attuning to the biographical roots of human interviewees or guides, like it is common in some urban walking methods, the opportunities here emerge from walking with a non-human through the mediation of an expert who has experience with another species and who has gotten to know their way of life, their mobilities, and their geographies. Here I also draw from the work of Tim Ingold, who showed, for example, that walking is a way of knowing, and I know we spoke about that also yesterday. He writes, for example, about the experienced hunter who can guide a non-expert. The hunter notices things from subtle indications that one unskilled in the art of hunting might not see. I argue that as an expert becomes more and more attuned to a species, they got to know the land as their milieu. And accompanying an expert guide is therefore not primarily about the expert, but about their expertise. In practice, every multi-species walk is a meeting between three entities. Myself as the researcher, the expert who mediates, and the species whose presence, through whose presence the land is reshaped. The expert not only is a guide, but it's a translator who makes the traces and rhythms of another being's world perceptible. This shifts the focus away from the researcher observing the expert toward the non-human interactions and how their presence structures the landscape. To illustrate what this might look like, I'll share an account of a walk I conducted with a mosquito expert. The description is meant to let you step into that experience and to sense how multi-species walking unfolds on the ground. When walking with an expert, I recorded our conversations. I took illustrated notes upon return, and I took a series of informal photographs with my smartphone. I used this material in my research, but also to illustrate the narration. And I think something that I also often reflect on is like, how do you, when you're walking, and this way you engage with the landscape also by taking pictures, and if you're drawing it like how we record these walks is a bit, it contributes also a lot, I think, to how we sense and like the experiences that we make through the lens or by directly viewing. Okay, so this is now this reflection on my walk. 15th March 2021. I'm in Au am Rhein, but I could be anywhere. Rheinhausen, Rheinau, Rheinstetten, Wörth am Rhein, Wiesenthal, Hagenbach, Graben-Neudorf. Many of the places of the Upper Rhine remind of the river and its reciprocal relationship with the land. I came here to meet Arthur Jöst, a biologist, a senior member of the CAPS, the local association that monitors and controls the mosquito population along the Upper Rhine. Today, I will join him on one of his regular monitoring walks in the swamp forest during mosquito season. It's 9 o'clock in the morning as Arthur picks me up in his car. It is cold and a rainy day. First, we drive to the CAP storage unit. The facility consists of 2 rooms in a derelict builder's yard. 2 garages with shutters, one used to store equipment, the other one as a side office. We enter a room packed with waders full of all sorts that are neatly ordered by size, covering the floor and one wall. Backpacks, raincoats are hanging from the ceiling. Boxes arranged on the wall host other equipment. Arthur helps me to find a pair of waders before we leave. Before we leave, he applies a large sticker with a mosquito diagram on the back door of his car, a reminder of the work to come. We drive to south of Mörsch, a district of Rheinstetten, on the edge of the Rhine's alluvial plain. As we go, Arthur explains that the most remarkable mosquitoes in the region are floodwater mosquitoes. They lay their eggs directly into the soil, calibrated to a certain level of moisture. They wait there until the groundwater rises or floodwater arrive. Then thousands of them hatch at once. Along the Upper Rhine, there are primarily 2 different groups. Some that prefer temporary floodwater of the alluvial forest, others the swampy elder forests and the meadows. Each group has evolved to sense exactly where water will stay long enough for larvae to develop. We stop at a parking lot at the edge of town. In front of us lies a wet patch of ground, covered by grasses, bushes, and low trees. From the outside, it looks unremarkable, just a piece of soggy land and the edge of a residential neighborhood. But as soon as we step in, the ground sucks at our boots. Puddles open into shallow pools, sometimes up to 30 centimeters deep. We each carry a ladle with a long wooden handle and a measuring cup. Arthur shows me how to approach a puddle from the side, slip the ladle into the water without making waves, and lift a sample. We crouch together over the cup, peering into the water. Suddenly, a whole microcosm appears. The water is alive with thousands of creatures. Arthur counts 20 mosquito larvae among them. That translates into 80 larvae per liter, well above the threshold that defines a breeding site. To record our findings, he pulls out his phone. On the screen is a color-coded digital map of the area, part of the association's WebGIS system. This patch appears in blue-green, showing its low elevation and flood potential. Arthur marks the spot with a dot, enters the larvae density, and immediately the dot turns red, a signal that this site will need treatment. We continue probing along the edges of the site. Some samples contain only a few larvae, others are dense with movement. Each finding is noted in the app. Later, Arthur will refine the map on his laptop, and from this, a helicopter pilot will plot a flight path, dispersing biological insecticide in the form of dry ice. Within days, the larvae will die, with a success rate of 95%. From here, we move on to the nature reserve southwest of the town, where the Federbach stream meets the floodplain. It borders a housing development built in the 1990s. The stream's floodplain forms a natural boundary of the residential area. On Arthur's GIS map, it appears dark pink to dark blue, as it lies significantly lower than the surrounding houses, which were built on elevated ground. In the nature reserve, the stream's floodplain overlaps with an old Rhine meander. It is covered with fragments of a once abundant alder swamp forest community. Here, water accumulates, forming swampy grounds between elaborate root systems and sedges. The stagnant liquid is nutrient-rich and shared by numerous water fleas, copepods, some water lice, caddis-flying glassworm larvae. It is covered by sedge and elder seeds. After the winter, the rising groundwater also flooded thousands of mosquito eggs that were buried in the damp alluvial soil. In early March, the first sun rays hit the surface, and when the oxygen level and temperature were right, the larvae started hatching. Now, as we walk the area, they measure about 5 millimeters and float tail up, head down beneath the surface. As we probe the water, we find a critical amount. The close proximity to human dwellings requires Arthur to mark the area for insecticide treatment. Walking through this swampy ground guarded by Arthur, I begin to notice how many different temporalities overlap here. The floodplain carries traces of river engineering works from centuries ago, when meanders were cut off and the groundwater was lowered for agriculture. The meadows have been managed for over hundreds of years, alternating between intensive and extensive use. Such biodiverse grasslands were widespread in the 19th century when grassland farming was the dominant agricultural practice. But today, they have become rare. The houses tell a more recent story of suburban expansion, edging closer to the wet ground. The mosquito larvae at our feet, in contrast, only spread so extensively after the straightening of the Rhine, when new temporary water bodies were created. For Arthur, all of these layers are familiar. As we walk, he tells me how he knows the landscape, which former meander we were walking in, which plants signal wetness and hint at areas prone to flooding, even where the vegetation is too dense to enter. Most importantly, Arthur tells me how he knows mosquitoes. The Upper Rhine Plain hosts about 35 different species, each with its own dwelling preferences. He can identify them just by the shape and movement of their bodies as larvae. He explains me how mosquitoes sense the elements. As embryos inside tiny eggs, they detect the oxygen level in the water, hatch only when it was low enough, meaning potential predators have already died. They sense where the water meets the land, choose precise spots to lay their eggs right at the threshold. As flying insects, they detect smell and the heat of humans. The females bite to obtain the protein-rich blood that nourishes their growing eggs. Arthur also knows the humans who live next to the mosquito territory. As we pass a residential area, he describes their fear of mosquitoes and their unease with the wetness of the land, a fear rooted deep in the region's history. This anxiety, he says, often keeps residents from appreciating the beauty of the bordering floodplains. He believes that by reducing mosquito numbers, his work helps improve the relationship between the people and the landscape in their backyards. After several hours of walking and waiting in the drizzle, I'm cold and tired, yet I realize how differently I now see this place. The walk revealed the floodplain as a site of constant negotiation between humans and insects, between control and care. One insight this walking practice during my fieldwork revealed is how deeply expertise itself is tied to movement. The biologists and ecologists I accompanied did not only carry their knowledge in data sets or in reports, they carried it in their bodies as mental maps built through years of walking the same sites. Similar to memory palaces in classic mnemotechnics, this map holds images intertwined with memories of floods, of breeding sites, of human interventions. During our walks, the experts recalled the layers. A bend of a river, a certain plant, or a stone became a clue that unlocked knowledge about a species' way of life. This connects to a longer history of thinking about knowledge as spatial, from classical arts of memory to Tim Ingold's reflections, also to Lucius Burckhardt's reflections on skilled practice. In multispecies walking, the landscape itself becomes not a place, but a field of memory. Not a palace, but a field of memory. Plants, water levels, or animal traces hold knowledge that is activated and shared while walking together. So walking is not only moving through a space, it is also a method of remembering, mapping, and transmitting knowledge across species. Today, as we live in times of ecological crisis that demand new forms of attentiveness, as researchers and designers and artists, we need methods that help us notice modern human relations and the ways that they shape landscapes. Multispecies walking might serve as such a method. It reminds us that perception is always partial, and that expertise, whether ecological, artistic, or that of the everyday, can expand that. And so it draws attention to the fact that we never perceive or inhabit the landscapes alone. Thank you. We can now have questions. Do we need to put this around?
Yeah. I saw you did a lot of drawings. How important was drawing for you to perceive the landscape?
I need this to speak up. Yeah, okay. Yeah, thanks for asking. Yeah, I did a lot of drawings, I think, in two ways. I think I have a lot of drawings that are kind of fieldwork sketches, and then I translated some of these drawings into proper kind of measured drawings. So it's kind of, I think it has two components. One is as a reflection or almost of kind of, because I think when you take photographs, sometimes it's so rushed, like it has a different speed. Like when you draw, you have to kind of stay, or you have to really think about what is going on. And I think it forces you to be very attentive to certain things. So it was very important for me, the drawing aspect in my work. But then because it was a doctoral research, it's very difficult to combine writing and drawing, because there is like certain things you have to deliver, and then the drawing has to happen. You cannot only draw, because yeah, it becomes quite difficult. But so in the end, I had a set of drawings that kind of accompanies the work, that really kind of zooms in certain, that like, I'm not showing them. It's kind of like I'm trying to look at the life cycle of these animals and how it is intertwined with the landscape changes that have been made. Or like, for example, with the salmon, the Atlantic salmon is reintroduced into the Rhine system. And I look at the people that work on the reintroduction of the Atlantic salmon, and I try to look at where we can encounter the salmon, because it's very problematic and it's kind of not working. So I look at the kind of care and the efforts that go into this project to make, which is also very symbolic, because people want the salmon back just for the sake of like having a sympathetic animal back that then drives other restoration projects, for example. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for sharing this, really, I think, inspirational work. I was wondering, because you said you did it under the scheme of landscape architecture, like how would you position, walking as a method now, after you learned everything about how this, shapes the landscape, and through that, the landscape can be shaped. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, in a way, this opportunity to write about it made me, because I was doing this research before kind of formulating the idea of walking as a method. I was then realizing, oh, I'm walking. It's like I'm doing this research through walking with experts. And there were specifically a few of these walks that were like really like the whole day. And it's kind of how these people are, like the people I accompanied, like biologists and geographers and so on, how they are working with animals in the field. It's like they are out all day. And then suddenly I was like, okay, this is the way I can learn about these animals, and this is the way I can somehow understand this. And I think it kind of just formulates the way we do field work. And of course, there are many different ways of walking, as we see, and as we also talk about it in this context. I think my work is kind of at the intersection. It's like it was in the Institute of Landscape and Urban Studies. So it's not particular. I don't have a landscape architecture background, but architecture. So it's like at the intersection, I think, of many different things, which I think is also that's nice about this group, that there are people from different disciplines, all kind of working on the intersection through walking, which is, I think, very nice. So I think for me, the walking is very generative, and you also come up with a lot of ideas when you spend time in a place, and somehow you see different things.
One more question, yes.
So this is from a very small paper that when I was doing my undergraduate in architecture, somebody had written about following cows in towns of India, basically just tracing where they walk. And then if you find a place where they accumulate, that's like the safest locality, that's like perceived as socially, traffic wise, everything, like, if you like, as an urban design point of view, that's what they were trying to theorize out of it just by following the animals. And in your study, I just like wanted to ask that there are two aspects. One is where you're walking from your own point of view, like you're following a species. And then there is a way the species actually takes its own route, like a cycle. So how does that two translate into a same drawing? Does that happen like from the human versus just the species, or like how does that two come in a single vital milieu drawing? Like that's
Thank you for your question. One thing about the cows, I don't know if you know the work by Man Barua. He writes in his book Lively Cities also about cows in Delhi, and it's very interesting, where he talks about these bovine economies and the kind of way how cows overlap, and they live in agricultural places but within completely in the city of Delhi. Maybe it's interesting. And then about, I think this idea of how you lose track of the species is also something I'm writing about in the PhD, as there are moments of encounter, for example, that are somehow artificially made possible, often through recording stations in the landscape. And it's the way, for example, before they vanish almost, like, for example, when birds, like, okay, as in terms of the experts, like you need the experts sometimes to even see the species. Like myself, if I don't recognize birds by the type of birds, I will not know them. But when I looked at the sand martins, for example, when they are nesting, you can see them because it's very obvious where there are the tunnels in the soil. But as soon as they go on migration and they somehow mix with other birds, or that they are only stationary somewhere, there is like ways you can follow with someone else and to understand where they are. But then there is also the moment when they get lost. And I'm trying to draw also this, or write about this. And then there is ways that humans try to still follow, like not with walking, but then it's usually with sensor technology in one or the other way. And it's like, obviously, it's difficult to do that, but we always want to know everything. So we're trying to keep track. Yes. Yeah, if you've seen the circular drawing, I'm talking about this as well. We can talk about it if you want. Thank you.
One last question, and then we have to move on. Also,
Yeah, go.
I just wanted to tell about I was last weekend at the premiere of the new Werner Herzog movie, Ghost Elephants, where he's accompanying a research team to find the big elephant in the highlands of Angola. And at the end, they need to find them just with the locals, because the locals can read the landscape where the elephant scratches on a tree, they see the signs and so on. And there was like a learning loop from the locals there and the scientists from America, because they could tell them about more historical things, what people found before and so on. So there was like a learning loop a bit from the people there and from the researchers that coming from out from the field. Was it in your case also this, that some people could also learn from you? And or it was just always that you learned from the experts?
I guess you have to ask them. It's like that. I don't know if I can speak for someone else in that sense. But I think for me, it is more that I have to go out there with a very open mind, being also appreciating, because I'm entering a different discipline then. And it's not that they are particularly interested in the architecture, landscape architectural perspective on their work that they are doing. It's more that I feel like you have to be humble and somehow appreciating that they're coming from a very, very different thing. And also you're kind of the guest in that setup. So for me, it was not about educating someone else that much. Maybe it informally happened, but it's not that I will be talking so much about my work. It's more that I'm receiving whatever is going on. Sorry, I'm going to stop. Thank you. Yeah.